The gunshot echoed across the vast desert landscape as Frances Prescott bolted from the abandoned shack, her heart thundering in her chest. She didn't dare look back. The sound of hooves and angry voices behind her only pushed her to run faster, her worn dress catching on sagebrush and cacti as she fled across the unforgiving terrain. It was 1878 in the Arizona Territory, and Frances had just witnessed something no woman should ever see, and now they were hunting her down for it. Her boots had long since worn through, and the rocky desert floor tore at her feet with each desperate step. Blood seeped through what remained of her stockings, but stopping meant certain death. The merciless summer sun beat down upon her as she pushed forward, her lungs burning and vision blurring from exhaustion and dehydration. "There she goes," a gruff voice shouted from somewhere behind her. "Don't let her get away." Frances veered toward a cluster of boulders, praying to find some kind of protection or hiding place. Her auburn hair had come loose from its pins, whipping across her face as she ran. The distant sound of a different set of hooves approaching from another direction sent a fresh wave of panic through her body. Just as she felt her strength giving out, a strong arm reached down and swept her up onto a horse in one fluid motion. She screamed, struggling against her captor. "Easy now," a deep voice commanded. "I'm not with them. Hold tight." The stranger's horse surged forward, a powerful palomino that seemed to fly across the desert floor. Frances clung to the saddle horn, still uncertain if she'd been saved or captured by someone worse. Her rescuer, a broad-shouldered man in a weathered Stetson, kept his arm secure around her waist as they rode hard away from her pursuers. For nearly an hour they galloped across the terrain, the man occasionally changing direction, leading them through shallow creek beds and rocky outcrops until the sounds of pursuit had long faded. Only when they reached a small canyon did he finally slow the horse to a walk. "I think we lost them," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You all right, miss?" Frances couldn't answer. The adrenaline that had kept her going was draining away, and the pain in her lacerated feet suddenly overwhelmed her. She swayed in the saddle, and the man's arm tightened around her. "Whoa now," he said, concern evident in his tone. "Let's get you somewhere safe." He guided the horse toward what appeared to be a small line shack nestled against the canyon wall, partially hidden by a stand of cottonwoods. As they approached, Frances finally got a good look at her rescuer. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and eyes the color of a summer sky. His clothes were dusty, but well-kept, not the attire of an outlaw. "Name's Jack Quinn," he said as he helped her dismount. Frances nearly collapsed when her feet touched the ground, a cry of pain escaping her lips. Without hesitation, Jack lifted her into his arms and carried her toward the cabin. "Frances," she managed to reply, her voice hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "Frances Prescott." The cabin was simple but clean, a single room with a small stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a narrow cot against the far wall. Jack set her down gently on the cot and moved to light a lamp. "This is one of my line cabins," he explained. "I run cattle a few miles north of here. Got several of these scattered around the range." He fetched a canteen and handed it to her. "Small sips," he advised. Frances obeyed, the cool water bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. As the lamp cast its warm glow around the cabin, Jack knelt to examine her feet, his expression growing serious as he saw the extent of her injuries. "Those men," he said as he gently removed what remained of her tattered boots. "The ones chasing you. Grayson's crew." Frances nodded, wincing as he peeled away the blood-soaked stockings. "How did you know?" "Been causing trouble around these parts for months now. running protection rackets on the smaller ranches, stealing cattle worse. His eyes met hers. What did you see that got them after you? Frances hesitated, then decided this man had earned her trust by saving her life. They murdered my uncle, Samuel Prescott. He refused to sell his mining claim to them. Her voice broke. I was bringing him supplies. They didn't know I was there until it was too late. Jack's jaw tightened. Sam Prescott was your uncle. Good man. Didn't deserve what happened to him. He stood and moved to a trunk in the corner, retrieving a basin, some cloths, and a small bottle. Your feet need tending. This is going to hurt, but we need to clean these cuts before infection sets in. He filled the basin with water from a pitcher, added a splash from the bottle, and returned to kneel before her. With surprising gentleness for his large, calloused hands, Jack began to clean each foot. Frances bit her lip to keep from crying out, but tears still streamed down her face. I'm sorry, he murmured, his touch becoming even more tender. Your feet were bleeding from the run. It's a wonder you made it as far as you did. Frances watched him as he methodically cleaned each wound, the cowboy working with focused care that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance. Thank you, she whispered. They would have killed me. Jack nodded grimly. Grayson doesn't leave witnesses. You're lucky I was out checking fence lines today. He continued his ministrations, the wet cloth turning pink with her blood as he cleansed her wounds. What were you doing out here alone, Miss Prescott? I came from Tucson 2 weeks ago, after my parents died of fever, she explained, her voice steadier now. Uncle Samuel was my only family left. He wrote that his claim was showing promise and he offered me a home. The bitter irony of her situation hit her anew, and fresh tears welled in her eyes. Now I have nothing and nowhere to go. Jack finished cleaning her right foot and began wrapping it in clean strips of cloth. You've got shelter here for now. Tomorrow we'll figure things out. His eyes met hers again. Grayson and his men need to be stopped, but the law around these parts is complicated. You mean corrupt, Frances said flatly. The corner of Jack's mouth lifted slightly. You catch on quick. He began cleaning her left foot with the same careful attention. Sheriff Wilkins rides in Grayson's pocket. Has for years. Frances watched him work, noting the way his sun-bronzed hands contrasted with the white cloth. Despite her situation, she found herself curious about this solitary cowboy who had risked himself to save a stranger. Do you live alone out here, Mr. Quinn? Just Jack, he corrected. And yes, just me and a handful of ranch hands at the main house, few miles north. Been that way since my father passed 3 years back. He finished wrapping her second foot and looked up at her with those striking blue eyes. You should rest. I'll make something to eat. As Jack moved to the stove, Frances took the opportunity to survey the cabin more thoroughly. It was Spartan but well-maintained. A rifle stood in one corner, a few books were stacked on a small shelf, and a battered guitar leaned against the wall. Nothing fancy, but it spoke of a man who valued order and simplicity. Jack worked efficiently at the stove, heating a pan and pulling supplies from a small cupboard. Nothing fancy, he said, seemingly reading her thoughts. Beans, bacon, and biscuits from this morning. But it'll put some strength back in you. The aroma of cooking food made Frances realize how hungry she truly was. As Jack prepared their simple meal, they fell into an uneasy silence, both aware of the danger that still lurked beyond the cabin walls. Frances knew her life had irrevocably changed today. She was now a hunted woman, witness to a murder that powerful men would kill to keep hidden. And yet, watching the cowboy move about the cabin, she felt a curious sense of safety she hadn't expected to find again. Her feet throbbed with pain, reminding her of how close she had come to death, and how this stranger had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't even had time to voice. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. "For everything." Jack turned and studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Anyone would have done the same. Frances shook her head. "No, they wouldn't have." She held his gaze steadily. "You risked your life for a stranger." A faint smile touched his lips. "Well, Miss Prescott, I've always had a problem with bullies." He turned back to the stove. "And Grayson is the biggest bully in 3 territories." As night fell across the canyon, Frances found herself in the strange position of sharing a meal with a man she'd just met, dependent on his protection, yet feeling more secure than she had in weeks. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, in this simple cabin with this quiet, capable cowboy, she allowed herself to breathe. Jack insisted Frances take the cot while he made a bedroll on the floor. As she drifted toward sleep, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion, Frances heard the soft, melancholy notes of a guitar. Jack sat by the dying embers of the fire, fingers moving deftly across the strings, playing a tune so full of longing it made her heart ache. She closed her eyes and let the music wash over her, carrying her into dreams that, for once, weren't filled with fear. Morning came with golden light filtering through the cabin's single window. Frances awoke to find Jack already up, tending to his horse outside. Her feet still throbbed painfully, but when she examined the bandages, she was relieved to see no fresh blood had seeped through during the night. The cabin door opened, and Jack entered with an armful of firewood. "Good morning," he said, nodding toward her. "How are the feet?" "Better, I think," Frances replied, attempting to stand. She winced as her weight pressed on her injured soles. Jack set down the wood and was instantly at her side, his arm providing support. "Easy now. Those cuts need time to heal." He helped her back to the cot. "You should stay off them today." Frances frowned. "I can't impose on you like this. You've already done so much." "Where exactly do you plan to go?" Jack asked reasonably. "Those men are still out there looking for you, and you can't exactly outrun them in your condition." The truth of his words silenced her protests. Jack busied himself preparing a simple breakfast of coffee and more biscuits. As they ate, he outlined his plan. "I need to ride to my main ranch today, let my foreman know what's happening, bring back some supplies and proper medicine for your feet." He studied her over his coffee cup. "I don't like leaving you alone here, but this is the safest place for now. Cabin's well hidden, and no one knows about my connection to you." Frances nodded, appreciating his straightforward approach. "I'll be fine. I'm more concerned about causing trouble for you. If Grayson finds out you helped me." Jack's expression hardened. Been waiting for an excuse to stand against Grayson for a long time. Man's been squeezing the life out of this territory for years. He set down his cup. "Besides, I'm not exactly without friends. There are others who feel the same way." After breakfast, Jack prepared to leave, checking his rifle and pistol before securing them. He left Frances with a loaded shotgun, showing her how to use it despite her initial reluctance. "Just in case," he insisted. "I don't expect trouble, but better prepared than sorry." Before mounting his horse, Jack hesitated at the doorway. "I'll be back before sundown. Bar the door behind me and stay inside." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "And Frances, you're not imposing. Some things are just the right thing to do." With that, he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats gradually fading into the distance. Frances barred the door as instructed and settled back on the cot, the shotgun within reach. Despite her predicament, she found herself thinking about Jack Quinn, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, and the sorrow she'd glimpsed in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. The day passed slowly. Frances discovered a small shelf of books, and selected a well-worn copy of The Last of the Mohicans. The hours slipped by as she lost herself in the story, occasionally resting her eyes to listen to the sounds of the desert, the whisper of wind through cottonwood leaves, the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of small creatures in the underbrush. By late afternoon, her anxiety began to grow. Jack had promised to return before sundown, but the shadows were lengthening, and there was no sign of him. She hobbled to the window, peering out at the empty landscape, worry gnawing at her. Just as the sun touched the western horizon, Frances heard hoofbeats approaching. Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by caution. She grabbed the shotgun and moved to the side of the window, watching carefully. It was Jack, but he wasn't alone. Another rider accompanied him, a slender figure on a bay mare. As they drew closer, Frances realized with surprise that the second rider was a woman, her dark hair braided and tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Jack dismounted and approached the cabin. "Frances, it's me. I've brought help." Frances unbarred the door, shotgun still ready. Jack entered first, followed by the woman, who removed her hat to reveal striking features that marked her as having Mexican heritage. "This is Dr. Elena Rodriguez," Jack introduced. "She works in the town of Copper Creek, about 15 miles north. She's a friend, and she's here to help with your feet." Dr. Rodriguez smiled warmly. "Mr. Quinn told me what happened. May I examine your injuries?" Frances nodded, relieved to have proper medical attention. As the doctor unwrapped her bandages, Jack brought in supplies from his saddlebags: food, clothing, and medicines. "Your cuts are clean, which is good," Dr. Rodriguez commented as she examined Frances's feet. "Mr. Quinn did a fine job with the initial cleaning, but you'll need to stay off them for at least a week." She reached into her medical bag for ointments and fresh bandages. "I'll leave these with you and return in a few days to check your progress." As the doctor worked, Jack prepared a more substantial meal than the previous night. The cabin filled with the aroma of stew and fresh bread, making Frances realize how hungry she was. "I spoke with my foreman, Thomas," Jack said as they sat down to eat. "He's discreet and loyal. He'll keep the ranch running while I stay here." Frances set down her spoon. "Jack, you can't put your life on hold for me. I can't ask that of you." "You didn't ask," he replied simply. "And it's not just about you. Grayson's been a cancer in this territory too long. What happened to your uncle, it's not the first time. But it could be the last, if we can gather enough evidence and find a federal marshal who'll listen." Dr. Rodriguez nodded in agreement. "Many of us have been waiting for an opportunity to see justice done. Grayson's influence has corrupted local law enforcement, but he's not untouchable." After dinner, the doctor prepared to leave, promising to return in 3 days. Before she mounted her horse, she took Frances's hands in hers. "You're not alone in this fight," she said earnestly. "There are good people here who want to help." As darkness fell, Frances and Jack settled into what was becoming a familiar routine. He built up the fire while she sat on the cot, legs extended to keep pressure off her feet. The simple domesticity of it felt strangely comforting. "Tell me about your ranch," Frances said, genuinely curious about the life of this man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. Jack leaned back in his chair, his face softened by the firelight. "It's not the biggest spread, but it's good land. My father came out here after the war, the big one, between the states. He was a Union officer who'd seen enough fighting to last a lifetime." His eyes grew distant with memory. "Started with just 20 head of cattle and built it up year by year. By the time I was old enough to really help, we had a decent operation going." "And your mother?" Frances asked gently. A shadow crossed his features. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her one winter." He was quiet for a moment. "Dad never remarried." Said he couldn't replace her, didn't want to try. Francis recognized the familiar ache of loss. I understand. After my mother died, my father seemed to fade away too. He lived another 6 months, but it was like his heart had already gone with her. Their eyes met across the small space, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. Jack cleared his throat and stood, moving to retrieve his guitar. "What about you?" he asked, settling back with the instrument in his lap. "What was your life like before?" Francis watched as his fingers absently strummed quiet chords. "Ordinary, I suppose. My father was a bookkeeper for a merchant in Tucson. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable." She smiled faintly at the memories. "He taught me figures and accounts. Said a woman should be able to manage her own affairs without depending on a man to do it for her." "Sounds like a wise man," Jack commented. "He was. My mother was a teacher before she married. She made sure I read everything I could get my hands on." Francis's smile faded. After they died, there wasn't much left, just debts and memories. Uncle Samuel's letter seemed like Providence, a new start, family to connect with. Her voice caught. "Now I don't know what happens next." Jack's fingers paused on the strings. "What would you want to happen if you could choose?" The question took Francis by surprise. In the chaos of recent events, she hadn't had time to consider a future beyond survival. I suppose I'd want someplace safe, work that uses my mind, maybe teach like my mother did." She looked down at her bandaged feet. "But first, I want justice for my uncle." Jack nodded, his expression solemn. "That's a start." He began to play again, a gentle melody that filled the cabin with warmth. "We'll figure out the rest as we go." As Francis drifted to sleep that night, she found herself wondering about the man sleeping on the floor just feet away. There was a depth to Jack Quinn that intrigued her, a quiet strength coupled with unexpected gentleness. Despite the danger that still loomed outside their temporary sanctuary, Francis realized she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. Days passed in the small canyon hideaway, falling into a rhythm that brought unexpected comfort. Jack would rise early, tend to his horse and the small garden behind the cabin, then prepare breakfast. Francis's feet were healing well, and by the third day she could stand and move about the cabin for short periods, though Jack was quick to admonish her if she overdid it. Dr. Rodriguez returned as promised, bringing news from town along with medical supplies. Grayson's men had been spotted asking questions in nearby settlements, but no one had connected Francis to Jack or the canyon cabin. The doctor also brought a dress and practical boots that would accommodate Francis's bandaged feet once they healed enough for her to wear them. "I have other news," Alina said as she repacked her medical bag. "A federal marshal is expected in Copper Creek next week. Judge Thornton requested him specifically. He's one of the few officials not in Grayson's pocket." Jack's expression brightened. "That could be our chance, if Francis can testify about what she saw." "It won't be easy," Alina cautioned. "Grayson has friends in high places. But Marshal Davis has a reputation for integrity. If anyone can help, it's him." After the doctor left, Jack and Francis discussed their options. The plan they formed was risky but offered their best chance. They would remain hidden until the marshal arrived, then Jack would bring him secretly to the cabin to hear Francis's testimony. "Once he understands what happened, he can start an official investigation," Jack explained. "With federal authority behind him, even Grayson will have to tread carefully." That evening, as they sat together after dinner, a comfortable silence between them, Francis found herself studying Jack's profile in the firelight. She'd come to appreciate his quiet presence, his thoughtfulness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, something he did more frequently now than when they'd first met. "Why didn't you ever marry?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider its propriety. Jack looked up, surprise evident in his expression, but he didn't seem offended. "Never found the right woman, I suppose." He set aside the knife he'd been using to whittle a small piece of wood. "Or maybe I was too busy with the ranch after my father died." It's not an easy life out here for a woman. Frances considered this. "I think that depends on the woman. My mother would have said that difficult circumstances reveal character rather than create it." A slow smile spread across Jack's face. "Your mother sounds like she was quite something." "She was," Frances agreed. "What about your mother? What was she like?" Jack's eyes grew distant with memory. "Kind, strong. She could shoot as straight as any man and bake the best apple pie in 3 counties. His smile turned wistful. "She taught me to read by lamplight after long days working the ranch. Said a man needed more than just calloused hands to make his way in the world." The conversation shifted to books they'd read, childhood memories, dreams they'd once had. Frances found herself laughing at Jack's stories of ranch mishaps, while he listened intently to her recollections of life in Tucson. As the evening wore on, Frances realized she was seeing the man beneath the reserved exterior, intelligent, thoughtful, with a dry wit that caught her by surprise. When she finally retired to the cot, Frances lay awake for some time, contemplating the curious turn her life had taken. In the space of a week, she had lost her only remaining family, narrowly escaped death, and found herself dependent on a stranger who was rapidly becoming something more than that. What that more might be, she wasn't ready to define, even to herself. The next morning, Frances awoke to find the cabin empty. A note on the table in Jack's neat handwriting explained that he'd gone hunting and would return by midday. Feeling restless after days of confinement, Frances decided to test her healing feet with a short walk outside. The morning air was cool and fresh, the canyon quiet except for birdsong and the gentle rustle of cottonwood leaves. Frances made her way carefully to a fallen log near the creek that ran behind the cabin, settling there to enjoy the simple pleasure of sunshine on her face. She was so absorbed in the peacefulness of the moment that she didn't hear the approach of riders until they were nearly upon the cabin. Panic seized her as she recognized the men 3 of Grayson's hired guns, led by his brutal foreman, Rance Maddox. Frances pressed herself against the ground behind the log, heart pounding. She was hidden from their immediate view, but if they searched the area, they would find her. The men dismounted, weapons drawn. "Quinn's horse is gone," one of them called out. "Place looks empty." Maddox spat tobacco juice onto the ground. "Search it anyway. Boss wants that girl found, and Quinn's been acting suspicious, riding into town for supplies and medicine." Frances held her breath as 2 men entered the cabin. From her hiding place, she could see Maddox circling the perimeter, examining the ground for tracks. He was dangerously close to discovering her when a gunshot rang out from the ridge above. "That's far enough," Jack's voice called down. He stood on a rock outcropping, rifle aimed steadily at the intruders. "This is private property, Maddox." The foreman's hand hovered near his pistol. "Just passing through, Quinn, tracking some rustlers." "There are no rustlers here," Jack replied coldly. "Just a man who doesn't take kindly to trespassers." The 2 men emerged from the cabin, shaking their heads at Maddox. They'd found nothing inside. Tension crackled in the air as Jack kept his rifle trained on them, outnumbered but holding the high ground. "You're making a mistake, Quinn," Maddox warned. "Mr. Grayson's looking for a witness to some unpleasantness. Harboring her would be unhealthy." "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack replied evenly, "but I know what happens to men who outstay their welcome on my land." For a tense moment, Frances thought violence was inevitable. Then Maddox signaled to his men. "We're leaving, But this isn't over, Quinn, not by a long shot. Frances remained motionless until the sound of hoofbeats faded completely. Only then did she see Jack scrambling down the rocks toward her, his face tight with concern. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, kneeling beside her. Frances shook her head, trembling with the aftermath of fear. "They didn't see me. I heard them coming and hid." Jack helped her to her feet, his arm steady around her waist. "We need to move. They'll be back with more men once they report to Grayson." Inside the cabin, Jack moved with swift efficiency, gathering essential supplies into saddlebags. "There's another place we can go. An old mining cabin in the high country. My father used it for hunting trips." He handed Frances the dress Alina had brought. "Can you ride?" Frances nodded, changing quickly behind a blanket Jack had hung for privacy. "My feet are much better. I'll manage." Within 20 minutes, they were mounted and heading deeper into the canyon. Jack led them through a narrow pass that Frances would never have noticed, following what appeared to be a game trail that wound steadily upward into more rugged terrain. The journey was grueling. Frances's feet throbbed in the stirrups despite the padded bandages, but she gritted her teeth against the pain. By late afternoon, they had climbed significantly, the desert scrub giving way to pine forest as they entered the foothills of a mountain range. "Not much further," Jack assured her, noting her pallor. "You're doing well." The mining cabin was smaller than the line shack, tucked against a granite outcropping and nearly invisible among the pines. Inside was a single room with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed and basic furnishings covered in years of dust. "No one knows about this place except my ranch foreman," Jack explained as he helped Frances dismount. "And he wouldn't tell anyone, even under threat." As Jack cared for the horses, Frances sank onto a rough wooden chair, exhausted but relieved. The cabin was primitive but defensible, with a clear view of the only approach trail and the protection of solid stone at its back. When Jack returned, he immediately set about building a fire and preparing their meager supplies. "I'm sorry for the rough accommodations," he said, glancing around the dusty interior. "This place hasn't been used in years." Frances shook her head. "It's perfect. They won't find us here." As darkness fell outside, they shared a simple meal of jerky and dried fruit. The fire cast flickering shadows across the cabin walls, creating an intimate atmosphere that made Frances acutely aware of their isolation. "How did you know they were at the cabin?" she asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Jack poked at the fire. "I was on my way back when I spotted their tracks crossing mine, circled around to approach from above just to be safe." His jaw tightened. "Good thing I did. You saved my life, again." Frances met his gaze across the fire. "You keep doing that." A small smile touched his lips. "Maybe I'm getting used to having you around." The simple statement sent an unexpected warmth through Frances's chest. In the firelight, Jack's features seemed softer, his customary reserve giving way to something more vulnerable. "I've been thinking," he said after a moment, "about what happens after all this is resolved, if the marshal helps us bring Grayson to justice." Frances waited, sensing he had more to say. "You mentioned wanting someplace safe, work that uses your mind." His eyes held hers steadily. "My ranch needs someone with a head for figures, someone who could manage the books, maybe even teach the children of my workers." He paused. "Just something to consider." The offer hung between them, both knowing it represented more than just employment. Frances found herself unable to look away from his gaze, seeing in it a question he wasn't quite asking yet. "I'd like that," she said softly. "To consider it, I mean." Something shifted in Jack's expression, relief, perhaps, or hope. Before he could respond, however, a sound outside caught their attention, a faint but distinct crack of a branch breaking under weight. Jack was on his feet instantly, dousing the lamp and moving to the window. Frances held her breath, fear returning in a cold rush. "Stay down," he whispered, rifle already in his hands. For several tense minutes they waited in silence. Then Jack relaxed slightly. "Deer," he said, relief evident in his voice. "Just a deer passing through." Frances exhaled shakily, the momentary terror highlighting something she'd been trying to ignore: her growing feelings for this quiet, honorable man who had risked everything to protect her. The realization both frightened and exhilarated her. Jack returned to his seat, running a hand through his hair. "We should get some rest. Tomorrow I'll ride to Copper Creek, see if the marshal has arrived yet." "Alone?" Frances couldn't keep the concern from her voice. "It's safer if we're not seen together," he explained. "I'll be careful." As they prepared for sleep, Jack insisted Frances take the narrow bed while he made a bedroll near the door. Despite her exhaustion, Frances found sleep elusive, her mind replaying the events of the day and dwelling on the implications of Jack's offer. What future could she envision now? Before her uncle's murder, she had imagined a quiet life helping him with his mining claim, perhaps eventually finding work in a nearby town. Now, everything had changed. The prospect of staying here in this wild, beautiful country working alongside Jack, seeing him daily, stirred emotions she hadn't expected to feel again after the losses she'd endured. Just before dawn, Frances woke to the sounds of Jack preparing to leave. He moved quietly, trying not to disturb her, but she sat up when she heard him checking his rifle. "Be careful," she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Jack turned, surprised to find her awake. "I will. Stay inside, keep the rifle close. I should be back by sunset." Frances nodded, suddenly unable to find the right words. What could she say that wouldn't reveal too much or too little of the confusion in her heart? Jack seemed to sense her unease. He crossed to the bed and, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand in his. "I'll come back," he promised, his thumb brushing lightly across her knuckles. "Wait for me." The simple touch sent warmth cascading through her. "I will," she whispered. After Jack departed, the day stretched endlessly before Frances. She occupied herself by cleaning the dusty cabin, finding purpose in the simple, physical task. By midday, she had transformed the space into something more habitable. The floors swept, surfaces wiped clean, and the single window washed to allow more light inside. As the sun began its westward descent, anxiety crept in. Jack should be returning soon, but what if something had gone wrong? What if Grayson's men had found him in town? The possibilities tormented her as shadows lengthened outside the cabin. When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching, Frances grabbed the rifle, positioning herself by the window. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Jack's broad-shouldered figure, but it quickly turned to concern when she saw he wasn't alone. Another rider accompanied him, a tall, lean man with a silver star pinned to his vest. Frances opened the door as they dismounted. Jack's expression was grave but determined as he made introductions. "Francis Prescott, this is Federal Marshal William Davis. He's here to take your statement about what happened to your uncle." The marshal removed his hat, revealing graying hair and a weathered face marked by years of service. His eyes were sharp but kind as he offered Frances a respectful nod. "Miss Prescott, I understand you've been through a terrible ordeal. I'm here to help bring those responsible to justice." Inside the cabin, Frances recounted every detail of what she had witnessed at her uncle's claim: the confrontation between Samuel and Grayson's men, the cold-blooded murder, and her desperate flight across the desert. The marshal listened intently, occasionally making notes in a small book. "This corroborates other reports I've received," he said when she finished. "Grayson's operation goes beyond simple land grabbing. There's evidence of claim jumping, extortion, even murder across 3 counties. He looked at Jack. Your name has come up too, Quinn. Seems Grayson's been trying to pressure you into selling your water rights for some time. Jack nodded grimly. 2 of my men were beaten last month when they refused to let his cattle access our stream. Sheriff Wilkins did nothing. Wilkins is part of the problem, the marshal agreed. But we're going to change that. He turned back to Frances. Your testimony is crucial, Miss Prescott. With it, I can obtain federal warrants for Grayson and his associates. Hope sparked in Frances's chest. You believe me, then? I do. Marshal Davis's expression was solemn. And more importantly, I intend to act on what you've told me. But it won't be easy or quick. Grayson won't go down without a fight. As night fell, they discussed strategy around the small table. The marshal would return to Copper Creek to send telegrams requesting additional federal agents. Once reinforcements arrived, they would move against Grayson simultaneously at his ranch and in town, arresting him along with Sheriff Wilkins and other conspirators. What about Frances? Jack asked, concern evident in his voice. She's not safe as long as Grayson's men are looking for her. Marshal Davis nodded thoughtfully. She should remain hidden until we're ready to move. That will be at least a week, maybe 2. He looked between them. Can you maintain this hideout that long? Yes, Jack answered without hesitation. We have supplies and I can get more if needed. The marshal stayed only long enough to complete his notes and finalize plans before departing. I'll send word through Dr. Rodriguez when it's time, he promised. Until then, stay vigilant. After he left, a strange quiet settled over the cabin. The prospect of waiting weeks for resolution should have felt daunting, yet Frances found herself experiencing an unexpected sense of peace. Here, in this remote cabin with Jack, she felt safer than she had since losing her parents. You did well, Jack said, breaking the silence. The marshal was impressed. Frances smiled faintly. He seems like a good man, honest. They exist, Jack replied. Not as common as they should be, but they're out there. He busied himself building up the fire against the night's chill. Are you all right with staying here longer? It's not much comfort. It's perfect, Frances said softly. I feel safe here. With you, she added silently. As days turned into a week, then 2, they established a routine that brought unexpected contentment. Jack would hunt in the early mornings, bringing back rabbit or grouse for their meals. Frances tended the cabin, discovered a small herb garden gone wild behind the structure, and salvaged what she could to add flavor to their simple fare. In the afternoons, when the mountain air grew warm, they would sit outside, Jack whittling or mending tack while Frances read aloud from the few books they'd brought. Evenings were spent by the fire, talking, planning, or simply enjoying comfortable silence. It was during these quiet moments that Frances felt something growing between them, a connection deeper than gratitude or circumstance. She found herself watching Jack when he wasn't looking, appreciating the gentle strength in his hands, the quiet intelligence in his eyes, the way laughter transformed his serious face into something breathtaking. On the 12th day of their seclusion, a thunderstorm rolled through the mountains. Rain hammered against the cabin roof as lightning illuminated the darkened interior in brief, brilliant flashes. They sat close by the fire, the storm creating an intimate cocoon around them. I've been thinking, Frances said during a lull in the thunder, about your offer to work at your ranch. Jack looked up, his expression careful. And I'd like to accept. She met his gaze steadily. If it's still available. Something flickered in his eyes, hope perhaps. It is, but he hesitated, seeming to search for the right words. I should be honest with you, Frances. The use of her given name, spoken in his deep voice, sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with the storm. When I made that offer, I wasn't just thinking about the ranch books. Jack set aside the piece of wood he'd been carving. These past weeks, getting to know you. It's made me want things I haven't wanted in a long time. Francis's heart quickened. What things? He moved closer, his eyes never leaving hers. A partner, someone to share my life with. His voice dropped lower. I know it's too soon. You've been through so much and there's still danger ahead. But I wanted you to know where I stand. The honesty of his declaration took her breath away. Here was a man offering not just safety or employment, but a future partnership, respect, the possibility of love. It frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. It's not too soon, she whispered, finding courage in the darkness. I felt it too. Jack's hand found hers, his calloused palm warm against her skin. When this is over, when Grayson is dealt with and you're truly safe, I want to court you properly if you'll allow it. Francis intertwined her fingers with his. I'd like that very much. The moment hung between them, charged with possibility. Outside, thunder rumbled, but neither noticed. When Jack leaned forward, his intention clear in his eyes, Francis met him halfway. The kiss was gentle at first, almost questioning, then deepened as they both surrendered to feelings too strong to deny any longer. When they finally parted, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find you, he murmured. Not out here, not like this. Francis touched his face, marveling at how right it felt. Perhaps some things are meant to be, despite the circumstances. They spent the stormy night talking of possibilities, of hopes for the future, of the life they might build together once danger no longer shadowed their steps. By morning, when sunlight broke through dispersing clouds, something had shifted between them, a commitment made, a future glimpsed. 3 days later, Dr. Rodriguez arrived with news. The marshal's plan was in motion. Federal agents had surrounded Grayson's ranch at dawn, while others moved against his associates in town. There had been resistance, gunfire exchanged, men wounded on both sides, but by midday, Grayson himself was in custody, along with Sheriff Wilkins and several others. It's over, Alina told them, her expression triumphant. Marshal Davis requests your presence in Copper Creek tomorrow. They need Francis's formal testimony to ensure the charges stand. The journey to town the next morning felt surreal to Francis. After weeks of hiding, the prospect of walking openly among people again was both liberating and terrifying. Jack rode beside her, his presence a steady reassurance as they approached the growing settlement of Copper Creek. The marshal met them at his temporary office, a room above the town bank. Grayson and his men were being held in reinforced cells under heavy guard. Your testimony was the keystone, Marshal Davis told Francis. It gave us the leverage we needed to convince some of Grayson's men to turn on him. They're talking now, revealing details of his operation across the territory. The formal deposition took hours, every detail recorded by a court clerk. By the time it was complete, Francis felt drained but satisfied. Justice for her uncle was within reach at last. What happens now? Jack asked as they prepared to leave. Grayson and the others will be transported to Tucson for trial, the marshal explained. Federal charges ensure they won't face a local jury that might be sympathetic or intimidated. Miss Prescott will need to testify again at trial, but that won't be for several months. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed Copper Creek's main street in golden light. For the first time since her ordeal began, Francis felt truly free, no longer hunted, no longer afraid. She turned to Jack, finding him watching her with an expression of quiet pride. It's really over, she said wonderingly. He nodded, taking her hand openly now. A new beginning. They stayed in town that night, Francis in a room at the modest hotel while Jack bunked with friends. The following morning, They gathered supplies for the journey to Jack's ranch, not a temporary refuge this time, but the start of a shared future. As they rode north, the landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands dotted with cattle and backed by distant mountains. After several hours, Jack pointed ahead to a cluster of buildings nestled in a verdant valley. "There it is," he said, a note of pride in his voice. "Quinn Ranch." The main house was larger than Francis had imagined. A solid two-story structure of stone and timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse completed the complex. As they approached, a tall man emerged from the barn, raising his hand in greeting. "That's Thomas, my foreman," Jack explained. "He's been keeping things running while I've been away." They were welcomed warmly, Thomas and the ranch hands gathering to meet Francis and hear abbreviated versions of their adventure. She was shown to a comfortable room in the main house, given time to rest and refresh herself after the journey. That evening, Jack found her on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. He joined her at the railing, their shoulders touching comfortably. "What do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward the ranch spread out before them. Francis took in the peaceful scene: cattle grazing in distant pastures, smoke rising from the bunkhouse chimney, horses in the corral nearby. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "I can see why you love it here." Jack turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. 3 months ago, I thought this was all I needed: the ranch, the work, the land." His eyes held hers intently. "Now I know differently." Francis felt warmth spread through her at his words. "What changed?" "I found a woman bleeding and desperate in the desert," he said simply. "And in saving her, I found something I didn't know I was missing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a wooden carving of a heart, polished smooth by careful hands. Francis recognized it as the piece he'd been working on during their days in the mountain cabin. "This isn't a proper ring," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "That will come later if you say yes. But it's my promise to you, Francis Prescott, a promise to protect you, respect you, and love you for as long as I live." His eyes searched hers. "Will you marry me?" Tears welled in Francis's eyes as she closed her fingers around the carved heart. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." Jack gathered her in his arms, his kiss sealing the promise between them as the last rays of sunlight gilded the land they would share. 6 months later, on a perfect autumn day, Francis Prescott became Francis Quinn in a ceremony attended by the entire ranch community, along with Dr. Rodriguez, Marshal Davis, and others who had helped bring Grayson to justice. The trial had concluded a month earlier with convictions for all involved, bringing final closure to the tragedy that had first brought Jack and Francis together. After the celebration, as evening shadows lengthened across the ranch, the newlyweds stood together on the porch of their home. "Happy?" Jack asked, his arm around her waist. Francis leaned into his embrace, reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had led her here, from desperate flight across the desert with bleeding feet to this moment of perfect contentment. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "It's strange to think that the worst day of my life led me to the best ones." Jack pressed a kiss to her temple. "Life has a way of surprising us. When I rode out that morning to check fence lines, I never imagined I'd find my future running across the desert." Francis smiled, remembering. "My feet were bleeding from the run. The cowboy cleaned each one with a wet cloth, and fell in love with their owner in the process," Jack finished, turning her in his arms to face him. "Though I didn't realize it until later." As twilight settled over the Quinn Ranch, Francis stood in the circle of her husband's arms, marveling at how a journey begun in terror had led to such profound joy. The wilderness that had once threatened her life had become her home, and the stranger who had saved her had become the center of her world. Life in the Wild West was never easy, but with Jack beside her, Frances knew they would face whatever came their way, together partners in all things, bound by love forged in the crucible of danger and strengthened by shared dreams of the future they would build.